Yesterday's loss to the Chiefs might actually be the worst loss that the Raiders have had, arguably in franchise history. And I don't think people realize how bad that loss was. And I know the final score doesn't actually indicate it, but if you guys look at some of the stats, if you guys watch some of the tape, the Raiders were straight garbage yesterday. Now, I don't even know how to state this. You know, it was such an embarrassing loss that the Kansas City Chiefs literally took out their starters. And then they just ran the ball on every single play in the fourth quarter. And they still had more plays in the fourth quarter than the Raiders had. And they just ran the ball. Like 4th and 8, they just ran it, right? Like they did not care. And they still ran more plays than the Raiders in the fourth quarter. They had more yards than the Raiders in the fourth quarter. And as a team, the Kansas City Chiefs just straight dominated the Raiders. This was by far the worst game that I personally watched as a Las Vegas Raiders fan. And I want to talk about it today because the Raiders defense is seriously broken. And for the first time, they got exposed. And I'm not surprised that they got exposed, right? And, you know, I talked about this multiple times on this channel that it was just a matter of time until this happens, until a team actually, you know, with a good offense coordinator, a quarterback that can kind of back it up. It was just a matter of time until this happens. And, you know, some of this did happen against the Colts as well. But against the Colts, you know, we had multiple turnovers. We had multiple big plays given up via special teams. But against the Chiefs, none of that really happened. But the Chiefs just continuously drove downfield on the Raiders. They had 3 drives that were over 80 yards that resulted in touchdowns. They had a 95-yard drive, an 86-yard drive, and I believe another one that was 94. So the Raiders could not get a stop. They gave up 30 first downs, which is wild. 60% third down completion percentage for the Kansas City Chiefs. The Raiders 0-7 from the Raiders offense. In fact, the only first down we got on third down, the Raiders did, was an illegal contact penalty. So we had 1 first down. Technically doesn't count as a converted first down for the offense. So technically we're 0-7 on third downs. But that was the only way we got a first down. And generally speaking, man, the Raiders got their asses kicked. And we're going to talk about this, man. There were so many bad plays that I saw that just made me, you know, like watching this tape, it just made me realize how bad the Pete Carroll scheme is. And, you know, in this video, I want to talk about if I think the Raiders need to replace Pete Carroll, because I think I'm at the point where yes, the Raiders need to replace Pete Carroll. And I know this is not going to be the popular opinion, but, you know, we're going to go over some of the issues with the Raiders, and a lot of this goes right back to Pete Carroll. And at the end of the video, we'll you know, really get into it, but let's watch some tape. Let's break this down. So, yesterday, the Raiders were on the defense 77 total times. And what's crazy about those 77 snaps is 45 of those came in a single high look. And what that means is the Raiders came out with a stacked box, and they had 1 safety deep. 45 of those 77 snaps. And of those 45 snaps, 83% of the time they played cover 3. So talk about being predictable. You know, the first 4 or 5 games that the Raiders had, they did the same exact thing where when they came out in a specific defensive look, they ran a specific play like 80% of the time. And what you're doing is when you're saying, hey, we're going to run this play, we're going to run this look, and this is what you're going to get out of it, you're telling the offense exactly what you're about to do. And as an offense, as you know, the Chiefs, the Andy Reid, and you know, just the way these guys design things, they're going to design cover 3 beaters. They're going to, you know, put some of your linebackers in conflict. And to me, the scheme's outdated that the Raiders are running, because we got multiple plays, and let's just get into some of these. You have a 3rd and 2. The Raiders going to be in a cover 6. Now, there's issues with just the setup of this, but just look at how easily the Chiefs pick up the 2 yards that they need. And I want you guys to think about this play here. The Raiders have 3 linebackers on the field right now. They have Landon Roberts, they have Devin White, they have Jamal Adams. And I know Jamal Adams, you can say, okay, maybe he's a safety, he's not really a linebacker. But if you're going to count Jamal Adams as a safety or as like a slot corner, he's on the slower side. He's probably one of the slowest to play that position in the NFL. Maybe not as like a true safety, but definitely as a slot corner, he'd be on the slower side. And that doesn't consider the fact that Isaiah Pola-Mao is probably more of a linebacker than he is as a true safety. Isaiah Pola-Mao is out there. He has to play cover 2. He has to play cover 1. He has to be able to run sideline to sideline. He's playing out of position. Jeremy Chin is way out of position. Like, there's probably even more than Isaiah Pola-Mao, truth be told. And the Raiders are coming out in this defense, right? They're coming out in this base defense against the Kansas City Chiefs. And all the Chiefs have to do is, you know, figure out where Devin White and Landon Roberts are and just pick it apart. And the Chiefs just quickly run this play in which they're going to make Landon Roberts make a play, and he's not going to be able to. So that was an easy first down. I say the scheme is outdated because the Raiders are they're calling like cover 2 or cover 3, and they're running these plays like you would 12 years ago. All right, 12 years ago, match concepts were not as, I shouldn't say teams didn't use them, but like teams didn't run match as much, right, in zone situations. And what I mean by that is, you're going to get a cover 2 play here, and Landon Roberts is going to drop deep as a hook. I don't know if he's playing Tampa 2. I don't think he is. He doesn't drop deep enough. But he does drop deep, and he is playing cover 2. And look at how he just lets Travis Kelce run freely. And they're going to get picked up 44 yards on this one. So the Raiders are giving up 44 yards on a play because their scheme's a little outdated. In a normal defense, right, in a more updated defense, Landon Roberts would actually stick with Travis Kelce on this one. When a guy runs across your face, you're going to stick with him, right? And what I mean by that is, a more updated scheme is going to say, hey, in a zone defense, at some point, it's going to turn into a man defense, right? At some point, 3, 4, 5 seconds into a play, if you're a linebacker, you're going to stick to the closest guy with you. And if he runs right, you run with him. The Raiders don't do that. They let guys run freely. And to me, that's outdated. You can no longer run defenses this way. You have to be able to, at a certain point, match up in a man situation. And sure, the defensive line should have gotten pressure. On this play specifically, it was only a 3-man pass rush. For some reason, they're dropping their defensive tackles. And Mahomes has all day, and he finds Travis Kelce for 44 yards. There was a 3rd and 4 play. And I don't know if this is more of outdated or if guys just are confused. Maybe there's too many plays being installed. Maybe, something reminds me of like Paul Gunther almost on this play. 3rd and 4, Patrick Mahomes is going to easily pick up the first down. But the thing with this play is, the defensive line is going to generate a little bit of pressure. And you have a couple of guys as Mahomes starts to run that could potentially go after Patrick Mahomes. And here's the thing, right? Like, if you're in zone defense, you're not going to just leave your zone and run after Patrick Mahomes, right? You're obviously not going to do that. But every single updated scheme, every single coach that runs a newer version of the NFL offense, they're going to have rules that, hey, if Patrick Mahomes is going to take off running and these are the 3 guys that are kind of on that side, this would be the guy that's going to run after Patrick Mahomes. This is going to be the guy that's going to go after the quarterback. And we're not talking about Joe Flacco. We're not talking about Aiden O'Connell. We're talking about Patrick Mahomes, who runs. He uses his legs. The Raiders don't have basic rules within their defense of who's going to go. Like, Darnay Holmes doesn't even know, he has no idea Patrick Mahomes is about to run. And these are the little issues that over the course of this season have kind of piled up. Guys are kind of out of coverage. Guys don't know the rules. Guys, you're running out there with base defense. Landon Roberts is not a cover linebacker. Devin White, to a point, isn't really a coverage guy either. But these guys are playing 100% of snaps for the Raiders every single week. Players are not meant for this scheme, right? Or at least the players will be kind of brought in. And again, you put part of that on Pete Carroll. There was a play in which Jeremy Chin, and this play was kind of wild to me because it was a fake screen and it was a nicely designed play, updated concept by the Chiefs on the offensive side. It's a fake screen to the left. And the point of this play is to attack cover 2 and then essentially attack the seams. And Jeremy Chin, who is lined up literally on the boundary side of the field, right? He's essentially going to be the shorter side of the field. He's not even going to be able to get over the top on this one. Talk about players that don't fit the scheme that they're running. Jeremy Chin is obviously brought in because the Raiders are going to run a lot of cover 3. That has not worked. So the Raiders have started saying we're going to run cover 2 zone or run cover 4, cover 6, right? Which is out of the same look where you keep 2 safeties high. And there's, Jeremy Chin's, that's not his role. He is not a split safety. Jeremy Chin was a defensive end last year for the Commanders. He was a linebacker last year for the Commanders. And we're trying to have this guy be a split safety. And he can't even make a play on the short side of the field. To me, that is wild right there. Right? It just speaks to the inability for the Raiders. I don't even know how to word this. The guy's just too slow to be a split safety. And that's not a knock on Jeremy Chin. He's a good football player, but you got to put him in position. You got to put him in the spot for him to make these plays. The Chiefs came out the plan. They said, hey, we know Landon Roberts can't cover. We know Devin White's not the fastest linebacker. The Chiefs came out when they needed chunk plays. They attacked Landon Roberts. They knew that, hey, this guy's a linebacker at the end of the day, and that too, he's a run defender first and foremost. He's 31 years old. the Chiefs just came out and continuously attacked. And, you can also make this other argument. The updated defenses have rules, and they also know how to pass rush. They also know, when we're going to run these defensive line games, which guy has to come around. Maxx Crosby's not a dumb football player. Maxx Crosby would never give Patrick Mahomes an easy out to take off running for 9 yards. That's not something Maxx Crosby would ever do. Something tells me one of these guys did not know on the defensive line what they were supposed to do, essentially. Mahomes takes off for 9 yards on this one. And to me, there's just so many little things over the course of a game that I watch and I say, these guys are just confused. Again, it reminds me of Paul Gunther when he was the Raiders defensive coordinator, 4 or 5 years back, because, I forget who it was. I think it was Will Compton. The guy literally came out and said, hey, this guy had like 80 play calls out there and everybody was confused all the time because there's so much given to us at all times. And we didn't know what the hell to do out there. That's what bad coaches do, right? They put way too much out there. And the Raiders are at this point where you can't fix this at this point. The fact that guys don't know how to run games and still contain a quarterback. The fact that our defense is like 12 years in the past. Cover 3, you're having Landon Roberts out there trying to cover guys. That's not going to work. When you're putting Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs and they come out with 4 wide receivers, you can't be in base defense. That stuff's not going to work. And, we're at the point where none of this stuff is fixable at this point. It's just not fixable. Because in the offseason, you start and you say, hey, we're going to start to install our base defense. And then week 3 of the offseason comes, our preseason or camp or whatever. Week 3 comes, now we're going to start to install our blitz packages. We're going to start to install more on top of what we're kind of building. And the Raiders are like step 8 and guys are confused, right? Whatever was supposed to happen, all these other steps just never happened. So the Raiders are having a lot of, they're having a lot of failures on the defensive side, and that goes partly back to Pete Carroll. He's our defensive coach, right? He's the guy. I know he's our head coach, but it's his scheme. He's the one that wanted to run this defense. He's the one that wanted to bring in Jeremy Chin, and he's the one that wanted Isaiah Polamau as your starting safety. Pete Carroll did not come into the Raiders and say, hey, how we're going to evaluate talent, how we're going to bring guys in is we're going to get the best guys. He didn't say that. He said how we're going to bring our guys in is we're going to get the tallest guys, the longest guys, the lengthiest guys. And that right there was the mistake early on in the process. Being tall and big and strong and physical does not win you football games. There's a reason why every safety in the NFL nowadays is like 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet, if not shorter than 6, right? They don't even hit the 6 marks. Teams want speed, they want quickness, and the Raiders have the opposite of that on the defensive side. Now, I should also just throw this out there, right? The Raiders did partly get screwed over in the first half. The score was only 31-0, and I know the Chiefs kind of let up in the fourth quarter. But the Chiefs shouldn't have actually scored 21 points in the first half. Like, the score should not have been 21-0 going into the first half. There was a 3rd and 6. I believe it was the second drive of the game. The Raiders actually get called for an illegal penalty. And this illegal penalty ends up giving them a first down. Now, 3rd and 6 was a stop, right? The Raiders obviously had gotten off the field, and the Chiefs would have probably kicked a field goal given 6 yards to go. The Raiders could have stopped them to 3 points as opposed to a touchdown. 2 drives later, same situation, 3rd and 4. Once again, you get a penalty. This one, I think, was a holding penalty. So, once again, it's a moment where the Raiders could have potentially gotten off the field, forced field goals, right? 6 points as opposed to 14. And I know we probably weren't going to win the game anyways, given the Raiders are a bad football team on the offensive side. But we definitely got screwed over in those moments by these NFL referees. And talk about getting screwed over. Have you guys recently tried purchasing tickets to a sporting event, like a Raiders game? Talk about hidden and unnecessary fees. This is why I partnered with TickPick. With over 20 million downloads, TickPick guarantees you guys the lowest prices with no hidden fees. What you see is what you pay. It just doesn't get better than that. Check this out here. I was looking at some Raiders tickets against the Browns, and it's kind of wild to see a ticket listed at $161. And then when you go to check out, the ticket actually only costs $161. So if you guys are thinking about going to a Raiders game or a different sporting event or even concert, I have a code for you guys. Make sure you guys use code HMA for $20 off your first purchase of at least $100. Let's get right back into the video. Now, obviously, you look at this game and you say, hey, the Raiders should have played a better game on defense. The offense obviously had its struggles, and I don't want to get too much into the offense because the offense is the same stuff at this point. Part of this is on the quarterback. I think a bigger part of this is on the offensive line. For the Raiders to have success, they got to run the football, and the offensive line's unable to open up run lanes. But it's not even just the offensive line unable to open up run lanes. I almost feel like from a coaching perspective, like Chip Kelly's the way he attacks, it's just predictable, right? It's basic. It's a basic version of offense. You watch Kyle Shanahan run offense, right? You see how he has guys going in motion. He'll run 3 different plays have the same look. A tight end goes into motion, it's 3 separate plays, and he'll do that 3 straight times, 3 separate plays. The Raiders don't do that. The Raiders will run split zone. It's the same action every time they run it. They'll run outside zone. It's the same action every time they run it. The Raiders on the offensive side are just too predictable. And I don't know if this is just 100% on Chip Kelly, if there's some sort of limitation that's happening out there. I don't really know. The offensive line's unable to move people and open those gaps up. And I know yesterday they blamed Jackson Powers-Johnson as like it's his fault, so we're going to replace him. I don't think he was by far the biggest issue. I still think Jordan Meredith is a bigger issue. The fact that, he had a fumble yesterday, which is crazy because we're in week 7. We're still fumbling snaps. That's wild in itself. But even more than that, one of the things I noticed with Jordan Meredith is he's just not pushing guys out of gaps. We're not having successful run plays because when you're running inside zone, for example, or some sort of split zone concept, you need your center to generate movement. You need your guard to generate movement, and that's just not happening right now, right? So there's just multiple reasons why this offense is not having success. But I want to talk about Pete Carroll because a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but I think the Raiders have to do this, man. Pete Carroll's well past his prime, and it's not even like debatable at this point. He's a terrible, terrible, terrible coach. The Seahawks had success literally 12, 13 years ago, which was when they won that Super Bowl. They had the Legion of Boom, had a lot of success. From that point forward, the Seahawks always just kind of were average, right? And they had, I think, 1 or 2 good years where Geno Smith kind of broke out, but you can put part of that on the coaching staff that those guys had, right? I think it was Zach Robinson, may have been someone else that was the coach. I forgot, maybe it was Dave Canales, who's the current head coach of the Panthers. One of these guys apparently was the reason why the Seahawks had like 2-3 good years. Outside of that, the Seahawks have just been average, and they've never really been that good. And the Raiders brought this coach in, and he's running things like he's 12 years in the past. And then more than just that, like the defense just, it's not current, man. The NFL has moved on from this style of defense. And the fact that guys are, I don't think players have quit on Pete Carroll yet, but it definitely does look like guys are starting to recognize that this team's just not a good football team. You could make the argument the Raiders are the worst team in the NFL. Like I would make that argument that there's probably 2 other teams with the Raiders that are, arguably at the bottom. And I think Pete Carroll is really to blame for a lot of this. The Raiders, under John Gruden had started bringing in talented players. Under Dave Ziegler and Josh Daniels, it wasn't all great, but they brought in some talented players. Tom Telesco brought in some talented players, and we're now at the point where some of those players that we should have obviously kept, the Raiders got rid of because they wanted quote-unquote scheme fits. They wanted 6'3" guys because the 5'11" guys weren't big enough. Even though those 5'11" guys may have been better, they weren't big enough. Nate Hobbs was a really, really, really good slot player. And he cost the Packers, I think, $10-11 million. The Raiders got rid of him, and I don't even know who's technically our slot player at this point because we just like a revolving door. We have so many guys that are coming in and out. To me, Pete Carroll's just not a good coach. I have very, very, very little hope that he will have success down the line. And I think what's going to end up happening if the Raiders keep Pete Carroll is at some point over the next 2 years, Pete Carroll's going to fire Chip Kelly, and he's going to put someone else in charge of that offense. We're going to continue to struggle. And then at some point, Pete Carroll will eventually get fired. But that's going to be after they initially fire Chip Kelly. And I'm not saying Chip Kelly's a great offensive coordinator at this point because he hasn't really shown that. But something tells me if the Raiders gave Chip Kelly a little bit more room, maybe if they let him kind of, run things the way he might want, maybe he would put Jax Powers-Johnson back at center. Who knows? Right? Maybe Chip Kelly will say, hey, Geno Smith's not my type of quarterback. I'd rather have Aiden O'Connell out there. Who knows what Chip Kelly would do? But I have more faith that Chip Kelly could have success for the Raiders than Pete Carroll. And I know people are going to say, man, this is what bad teams do. They turn over their coaches and, at some point you need consistency. And generally speaking, I do agree with that. You do need consistency. You do need coaches that are consistent, that are here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But the thing is Pete Carroll's not going to be here for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. The guy's 74 years old. He's literally going to be here for 2 or 3 years based off his contract, and then he'll probably retire with someone else taking over. And obviously the natural thing would be that Chip Kelly kind of takes over. But I just don't like what Pete Carroll's doing on the defensive side. And, in the NFL, you can score 40, 50 points a game, but if your defense can't get stops, you're not going to win Super Bowls. The Kansas City Chiefs have proven this. They'll score so many points, but they won't win because their defense can't get a stop. The Cowboys have scored 40 points this year in 3 separate games, and they lost to the Panthers because their defense could not get a stop. We see this happen all the time where teams score on offense, but then the defense can't get the stop. Then on the other side of this, you look at the San Francisco 49ers, where their defense, even banged up, is still dominating. They're still having success. Robert Saleh is a really, really good coach when it comes to running defense. Every time he's been a defensive coordinator, every time he's been a head coach, he's had top 5 defenses. And right now, the Niners have one of the best defenses. And that's without Nick Bosa. That's without Fred Warner. That's with 2 rookie defensive linemen starting, a couple of rookie corners and defensive backs starting. Robert Saleh is a really good coach. And some people even say Robert Saleh is the reason why Pete Carroll has his Super Bowl rings and all the success that he has had, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's true, because Robert Saleh has had a lot of success since he's left Pete Carroll, while Pete Carroll's struggling, man. I think the Raiders have to really think about how they're going to go forward. I think Geno Smith could be a better quarterback if maybe there was more talent around. So that's going to be something the Raiders have to fix this offseason. But this season is over at this point. The Raiders have no hope. I've looked at the schedule. We have maybe one team we can beat as we kind of go forward, which will be the New York Giants. And based off of how they're playing, I don't even think we're going to beat them. To be honest, I would not be surprised if we only have 2 wins the rest of this season, because this team, it just looks really, really, really awful. I have no hope in the Las Vegas Raiders this season. I have no hope in Pete Carroll as well. But I do think the Raiders, they do have talented players. So hopefully as we continue to go forward, at some point, hopefully it clicks. Hopefully they're able to get the quarterback situation figured out. Hopefully the offensive coordinator gets figured out. We'll see what ends up happening, man, as the Raiders kind of go forward. At this point, I think the Raiders will be sellers going into the trade deadline. There's about 2 weeks left. We have a bye week coming up. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time with another video.